he kept assuring Nigerians that this was for their own good, that we had to be patient, and that we were going to reap the great rewards of the structural adjustment programs. But Babangida wasn't about to be patient and reap his own rewards later. So he built himself a 50-room mansion, acquired a private jet, acquired several Rolls Royces, and retired when he was forced ultimately to retreat in 1993, having organized an election, perhaps the only election in Nigeria's history that people credited with some credibility. And he decided he wasn't going to leave. And the country was then convulsed by great protests and so on that forced Babangida to retreat. And by the way, he retreated only because the country became ungovernable for him. So he said he was retreating. So he retreated with what was estimated perhaps to be as much as $5 billion. Okay? But Nigerians were told to wait. You know, his reforms will bear fruit in the future. But the man did not want to wait and collect his pensions or something whenever the great benefits of his economic policies began to show up. You know, so he took his rewards up front and took just an obscene figure. Well, Babangida was succeeded by a man who perhaps met and even surpassed his act of treachery. Sani Abacha, another military dictator. Sani Abacha was a person. Nigeria has 4 refineries. Under Sani Abacha, there was a deliberate policy to gut those refineries, to sabotage those refineries, to bring them into dilapidation, so that the government will begin to award contracts, usually to Sani Abacha's family and his closest friends. So a coterie of his friends and family were now giving contracts to import fuel, refined fuel into Nigeria. On one occasion, they imported fuel that was so toxic that it had to be thrown away. So this began the policy now of the sabotaging of the internal production of fuel, of refined fuel that Nigerians used. Now, under Sani Abacha, having deliberately gutted the refineries, the 4 refineries, contracts were awarded to a few favored friends of his regime to rehabilitate the same refineries. And the money was simply pocketed. That was the arrangement. Nigeria is a country where, you know, you say that things are stranger than fiction. Nigeria is stranger than fiction, you know. In other words, Nigerians, or fiction has invented Nigeria, as it were. Fiction has invented Nigeria. So, however, as a friend of mine says, when you talk about absurdities, the thing that is most absurd is what makes sense in a space called Nigeria. The thing that is most absurd. Now, to give you a sense of the absolute depravity of the Abacha regime, on one occasion, Abacha sent his chief security officer to go to the Nigerian Central Bank and pick up $2 billion in cash. The money was handed to him, no questions asked. And he kept the money in his presidential residence and dispensed it to his friends as he wished. Well, Abacha ultimately died in a very stylish, very fitting way. He imported 2 young women from India, I believe, and there was a Nigerian local, sort of a domestic throwing, and he was in bed with 3 women when he began to shake and to froth in the mouth and then died. some people believe that he must have overdosed on Viagra. And if you have 3 women to service you at the same time, then you have to keep up, right? So that's Abacha. Now, it was only after Abacha died that again, during Abacha, the Nigerian opposition movement really arose, that was quickly driven out of the country. So people like Wole Soyinka, the Nobel laureate, went into exile for the 2nd time in his life. And the government very soon announced that Soyinka was wanted on treason charges, because there were bombs that went off in trucks that were carrying soldiers, and a lot of soldiers died, several bombs. And so the government accused Soyinka and the opposition movement of planting those bombs. It was only after Abacha died that it was uncovered that he was planting the bombs to kill his own soldiers so that he could catch Soyinka and hang him. That's how depraved. So when I say that fiction has invented Nigeria, this begins to give you a little glimpse of that. Well, so in 1999, there were what were billed as democratic elections to return Nigeria once again to an elected government. That election was conducted by serving and retired military generals, and they brought back a former military dictator, Olusegun Obasanjo, and basically rigged the election for him because they wanted somebody who would go there and control things so that they would not be probed and nobody would ask questions about all the monies that the military has stolen in Nigeria. So Obasanjo fit the bill. When Nigerians demanded that Ibrahim Babangida, the man who had retired to a 50-room mansion, be tried for his stupendous wealth, Obasanjo said, well, if you have proof of his corruption, give it to me, then I'll try him. If you have proof of his corruption, give it to me. And some of us, I wrote in my column, that we have to adopt a new doctrine with regard to criminal prosecution. In this country, they say you are innocent until proven guilty. I say, when you find an ex-general who was paid a salary as a military general, who is worth billions of dollars, has a private jet, lives in a 50-room mansion, has several Rolls Royces, we must presume him guilty until he establishes his innocence. He has to prove to us that he won a lottery, worth maybe $500 million at minimum, you know, or that his father was so wealthy and bequeathed $1 billion to him. Then we'll leave him alone. If he didn't prove it, my argument was that we should presume that the money is stolen from the Nigerian people. Well, so Obasanjo was the one who, again, in pursuing a policy that was consistently anti the Nigerian people, but consistent with expectations of the IMF and the World Bank for further liberalization, for the opening up of the Nigerian market to all kinds of junk. Obasanjo was the one who began the policy of removal of fuel subsidy. So, but he was doing this in bits. So from time to time, during the 8 years that he was the president of Nigeria, he reduced the fuel subsidy 6 times. Each time when he removed the subsidies, workers will call a general strike. And Obasanjo would make the argument that he needed the savings in order to provide infrastructure in the country. And the truth is that there's nothing that works in Nigeria. Power, I spoke with a Nigerian novelist today and she told me that this is day 3 that she's not had even a minute of power. And that there are some parts of the city in Enugu, which is a major city, where residents have not seen power in a month. So, if you go to a Nigerian city, to the most privileged neighborhoods, it is a nightmare to sleep because everybody is running giant generators. So the generators are just, so it's amazing. It's unbelievable. And yet, Obasanjo told Nigerians that he needed to reduce what the government paid as fuel subsidies in order to provide things like power, provide roads, to refurbish Nigerian universities which have suffered decades of neglect, where the products of Nigerian universities are now worse than mediocre high school students in most places in the world. Okay, so Obasanjo said he needed this money in order to begin to fix things. 6 times he removed or he reduced fuel subsidy. Obasanjo left office after 8 years, and he couldn't point to 1 kilometer of road that he could say, I built this road from subsidy money that I removed. Could not account for 1 minute of improvement in the power supply that he could credit to removal of fuel subsidy. Instead, Obasanjo moved into his own high-rise 50-room mansion in Abeokuta at the end of 8 years. So he and Babangida became competitors. Babangida built a high-rise 50-room mansion in Minna, his hometown. Obasanjo, after his own 8 years now, has his own 50-room mansion in Abeokuta, his hometown. Babangida has a private jet. Obasanjo has got his own. Babangida has a fleet of cars. Obasanjo has got his own. Babangida has several $100 million, perhaps billions of dollars. Obasanjo has got his own. Meanwhile, the Nigerian people who were told that the removal of subsidy, fuel subsidy, had to do with the provision, the improvement of their lives, are still being told to wait. Or we're still being told that God is in control. Or we're still being told that we should pray and our problems will be solved. So, when Goodluck Jonathan was rigged in, because again in Nigeria, in 2007, there was an election that was particularly egregiously rigged, and in fact some foreign observers as well as local observers said it was the worst election in history. This could be hyperbole, but Nigerians will not quarrel with that conclusion. Then last year there was another set of elections in Nigeria, and because they were not as bad as those of 2007, Nigerians some people began to say that this was a credible election. Well, if a student takes an exam and scores 0, and then another student gets 5%, Nigerians will argue that the student who scored 5% has done well. But as we know, both of them signify profound failure. So the election of last year, I argue, was similarly rigged, but what happened was that the ruling party invented new technologies for rigging, new ways of rigging, that they invited foreign observers. And what they did was that because of the state of insecurity in the country, no foreign observer could go out on his or her own to observe elections. So you have to depend on the government to provide with police security. So all those places where they took foreign observers, they make sure that things went smoothly. Everywhere else, they rigged the elections just as worse, just as badly as they've done in the past. But of course, the foreign observers now said things were peaceful, elections were orderly, so these elections passed muster. So Jonathan, in running for the election, promised everything, promised Nigerians everything. He stopped short of promising that he was going to personally deliver breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But some of us knew that it was going to be business as usual. As soon as the government was quote-unquote elected, his ministers began to make the case for removal, absolute removal of fuel subsidy from the country. Now, it's important that we understand that even what's called subsidy is very